You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and it's time for a cult story. And I had never heard of this cult, but a listener recommended that I look into the new leads in several murders that the Zivians, or the Ziz Cult, might be connected to. So let's start where I started. Who are these people? Well, we're in Berkeley, California, and the Zizians' leader is Jack Ziz Lasota, a 32-year-old transgender woman, born male, but prefers to be known as female. And I'm just clarifying, do not come at me in the comments. I'm making sure everyone's on the same page. In the story, I will refer to Ziz as a female and by the pronouns she and her. Now, the blonde, shoulder-length, and curly-haired leader was born in Fairbanks, Alaska in 1991. She studied computer science at the University of Fairbanks before moving to California in 2016. That's when she told followers that moving was her destiny. Once she landed in California, she worked for Google for just a short time before taking part in an apprenticeship at the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. It was during this apprenticeship that Ziz began immersing herself in the rationalist movement. And I don't expect you to know what that movement is. I didn't. So here's the Rationalism for Dummies course. Rationalism has three key components. First, humans can reason their way to certainty. They become the keeper of all knowledge. Not a god, not religion. The human is the one who knows everything. Second, our thoughts determine our existence. We can be alive through thoughts alone. I interpret this as our thoughts are always the superior mechanism, not science, not tangible matter. The mind is the one who controls everything. And third, the rationalist's thoughts are always the answer, meaning if a rationalist believes it, then your truths or experiences can't supersede the rationalist's thought. Now, I'm sure that is not near enough info on what the whole movement is, but it's a good basis for what's to come. Now, after crashing out at several jobs, Ziz, in 2017, started working with a friend, Gwen Danielson. She is another transgender woman, and they're remodeling a fleet of boats. I mean, I could have said just about anything and you wouldn't have guessed that they were remodeling boats. Here's what they're doing. These are old boats, and the two friends are trying to regentrify the boats to be used for cheap housing for a group of rationalist followers. These are young and talented compatriots who are dedicated to, quote, saving the world with their thought processes. I want you to keep that in mind. These are very intelligent people that get caught up in a cult. It's so bizarre. Now, the two friends, Gwen and Ziz, they started with a nearly century-old tugboat named Caleb that they sailed from Alaska to the San Francisco Bay Area. While they worked on the boats, Ziz became active on her blog and other rationalist forums. On one of those forums, called Less Wrong, Ziz would discuss using manipulative tactics to save the world. These discussed tactics on the blog and such, well, they included the concept of killing people. Ziz would use words like anti-ethics or dichotomy leakage. She also classified people as zombies or vampires. That's when she had distaste for them. And then she would call others single good or double good when she liked their behaviors. She also wrote about our brains and that they have two hemispheres. One side is good and one side is bad. So one side could be one gender, the other side of the brain could be another gender. One could desire to kill people, the other side could desire to help others and save the world. And through this blog and these online forums, and also while attending rationalist events, Ziz kind of got bored, or at least that's the way I'm interpreting it. She didn't seem satisfied that other rationalist views didn't exactly mirror her views. So Ziz started her own group, filled with what she described as smart, techie vegans, most of them transgender women, and they shared an obsession with the dangers of artificial intelligence. One expert in applied rationality described Ziz as a woman who gathered extremely vulnerable and isolated followers in order to grow the size of her cult. So, how does this cult become radical? Well, Jessica Taylor, who is an AI researcher, she told the AP that she met Ziz both in person and online through various rationalist community events. She said Ziz has a radical ideology that believes it's okay to commit violence if you're accomplishing your end goal. So here's an example. Like, a rationalist doesn't pay rent, believing that it's reasonable, and then violently defending oneself when faced with eviction. They believe because their brain says they can live on the land, they can live on the land without paying rent. Now, these radical beliefs led to a few brushes with the law. The first one in 2019, when Ziz and two of her followers challenged a public event. See, Ziz and Emma Borhanian, and then another person, Alexander Leatham, they blocked the entrance to the Center for Applied Rationality in Sonoma County, California. Now, this is weird. They should be their friends. These are the people they believe like. Well, instead, they allegedly felt like those people were thinking wrongly. And remember, they believe, the Zizians believe, that their thoughts supersede other thoughts. So even when you're both rationalists, the Zizians will always be right. Now, the four were masked wearing the Guy Fawkes mask made popular by the movie V for Vendetta. Haven't seen it, but I know what it looks like. Police were called, and the three were arrested and charged with criminal conspiracy and false imprisonment. From there, the alleged crimes ramped up. The bizarre violence began in August of 2022, when Ziz allegedly faked her own death. The Coast Guard was called to the San Francisco Bay Area for a report of a person who had fallen off of a boat. Ziz was presumed dead when the Coast Guard could not find her body in the choppy waters. Back in Alaska, an obituary was published in a local paper for Ziz, and then a judge even declared Ziz dead. Well, just a few months later, Ziz, and remember, she's pretending to be dead, well, she gives up on boats as a cheap housing idea. Instead, she and Emma and Alexander, those are her mask-wearing, entrance-blocking buddies, well, them and others were all now living in vans and box trucks on a property owned by Curtis Lind. This is in Vallejo, California. Now, Curtis was charging them rent for the land, the land that they're living on with their box trucks and their vans. And we've already learned that concept of paying rent, well, it doesn't really mesh with Ziz. So after months of no rent from the Zizians, Curtis attempted to evict them from the property. Late in 2022, Curtis, who is 80 years old, was impaled with a sword and partially blinded in one eye when his eviction notice led to violence between him and the Zizians. Curtis was packing, though. This 80-year-old guy has got heat, and he got off several shots, hitting two of the Zizians and killing Emma. Curtis was never charged because authorities believed he acted in self-defense. But guess who is charged? Alexander and another Zizian. They are slapped with attempted homicide. Now, interestingly, Ziz was there the whole time during this fight between Curtis and the Zizians. She was spoken to by police, but she was not charged. And my guess is the police had no idea Ziz was supposed to be dead, body in the San Francisco Bay, unrecovered. And also, Ziz is very intelligent and knows when to stay out of legal trouble. Well, 2 months later, in January of 2023, the alleged violence by Ziz went cross-country. to a Philadelphia suburb and the home of 71-year-old Richard Zako and his 69-year-old wife, Rita. Someone had entered the couple's home and shot the retired couple, each of them in the head, killing both. When police finally entered the home and conducted their extensive search, they found the driver's license of Michelle Zako, the couple's daughter. As they tracked down the daughter, they became concerned she was involved in the murders. So, they conducted a search at the home she was staying at in Vermont. Michelle, who was used to the radical behavior of the Zizians, well, she wasn't in the Vermont home. She was smarter than that. Instead, she was hiding out in a hotel in Philadelphia, and she was also with Ziz. When she was tracked down at that hotel, she refused to talk with police. And not shockingly, Ziz was getting in the way of those conversations. Remember, this is a cult, and when you don't comply in this cult, you're the one that's always wrong. Now, authorities arrested Ziz and charged her with obstructing an investigation, which then allowed the investigators to search the hotel room where Ziz and Michelle were hiding out. Seized in the search were a gun and ammunition that allegedly belonged to Michelle. And that ammunition, well, it matched the bullets that had killed her parents. Ziz was being held at the George W. Hill Correctional Facility in Delaware County for several months. She was awaiting a court date, and she couldn't produce the $500,000 bond that had been set by the judge. Eventually, over the next 5 months, Ziz's, or the bell for Ziz, or Ziz's bell, I don't know how to make her name possessive, Ziz's bell, well, it was dropped in increments until an unsecured bell was determined, and that allowed Ziz to just leave the jail. You can write the script from here because Ziz never returned for any court date in Pennsylvania after being let out on no bail. Okay, that leaves us here. Are there charges for the murders of the older couple, Michelle's parents? Well, I want you to hold on to that for just a second. We'll get to that answer. Let's stick with the alleged crime timeline because we got more. Now we're back in California, and we're back with Curtis, the landlord who was partially blinded and in self-defense shot and killed one of the Zizians. Well, in the first week of January of this year, Curtis was found dead on his property. His throat had been slashed. Investigators believed it was a silencing killing, meaning the Zizians didn't want Curtis to be able to eventually testify against the two Zizians who had been charged with attempted homicide. So they allegedly killed him to keep him permanently quiet. Officers pretty quickly charged Ziz Cult member, 22-year-old Maximilian Snyder, with Curtis's murder. But we're still not done with the crime spree. 3 days after Curtis was killed in January, two alleged Zizian cult members, Felix Bachholt and Teresa Youngblood, well, they sparred with a U.S. Border Patrol agent near the Canada-Vermont border. The situation escalated and Felix was shot, and so was 44-year-old Border Patrol agent David Mayland. Both Felix and David died. Teresa was wounded in the shootout and was arrested, and she now faces weapons charges. Okay, here's where the crime spree connection happens. Found in the car, being driven by Felix and Teresa, were cell phones wrapped in tinfoil, walkie-talkies, 2 full-face respirators, and tactical gear that included a ballistic helmet. There was also night vision goggles and a tactical belt. And 2 guns were recovered at the scene of the Vermont, Canada shooting of the Border Patrol agent, and they were found to have been purchased by Michelle. Remember, she is the daughter of the dead parents, the one that was with Ziz. And she was also the one whose license was found in the house of her dead parents. Well, because the guns were connected to her, and it was a Border Patrol agent, and now we're talking about the feds, investigators dove into the past of Michelle even deeper, and she apparently was engaged to a fellow Zizian. So who's her fiancé? Maximilian, the man behind bars for killing Curtis. All of these deaths are connected. Now, with all of that as a basis, here's the update to the case. 2 weeks ago, 26-year-old Daniel Blank, 34-year-old Ziz Lasota, and 32-year-old Michelle Zako were all arrested in Maryland. But they weren't arrested for the murders. They were arrested because they were up to their old not paying rent routine. The trio had been camping on a rural property in western Maryland. The three got into a scuffle with the owner of the land, who didn't want them camping there in their box trucks. The landowner wasn't going to settle this one on his own, so he called authorities. And those authorities were more than willing to arrest Michelle and Ziz, especially since Ziz had blown off his court dates and Michelle was under investigation for her parents' deaths. All three have been charged with trespassing and weapons offenses. They were denied bail due to the wider investigation into their possible roles in the multiple homicides. So let's tally those homicides up. We have Michelle's parents, we have Curtis back in California, and the Border Patrol agent David Mayland. And remember, 2 other Zizians are dead due to these murders. So 6 deaths are allegedly connected to Ziz and her cult, even if Ziz didn't pull the trigger. Now, earlier I referenced Jessica Taylor, a woman who had met and conversed with Ziz and her group members. She also dated the man killed in the shootout with the Border Patrol agent David. She said she has been worried the cult had turned into a, quote, death cult or a, quote, murder gang. She said they had oaths to a moral code that is at odds with mainstream laws and behaviors. This includes their food. They're so restrictive with their vegan diet. It's almost treasonous to not consume the diet that they tell you you have to consume. She openly is quoted as saying that these people are okay with killing anyone that they determine is bad. And I think we have this idea about cults, that the members all live together on a compound and they're controlled both geographically and psychologically. Palumo Saha, a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, explains that in today's culture, the geographical control or component just isn't necessary. The members of the cult can, quote, live together online, which explains how this alleged crime spree can span Alaska, California, Maryland, Vermont, and Pennsylvania. Federal investigators are still conducting the investigation into the deaths, and they're determining if they can file charges against Ziz and her followers. I'll keep you updated on this cult. I do want to take a moment to remember David Mayland and Curtis Lind. 44-year-old David was born in Minnesota. He served for 6 years as a security forces journeyman in the U.S. Air Force. After he left the military, David worked at the State Department. He actually was at the Pentagon during the September 11th attacks. He was killed because he checked one of the cult members' visa papers, and that led to the shootout. David is survived by his fiancée, Roseanne Frichet. And how about 82-year-old Curtis Lind? Curtis had survived the violent attack by the Ziz Cult members before they allegedly killed him in January. He also just survived a severe auto accident before he was targeted in this year's attack. He often took part in beach cleanups, this in hopes to better his community. He is the father of 2 children and the grandfather to 4. Unfortunately, Curtis was left with heavy debt due to fighting his court cases against the Zizian cult members and also his medical bills following his car accident. His family is left caring for that. Now to this crime story out of LA County that came to light on Monday when an indictment was unsealed containing 71 counts of child abuse, conspiracy, and battery. But it wasn't parents abusing children, or family abusing children, or even school teachers abusing children, which I have reported on all of those plenty of times here at Rise in Crime. No, these charges were filed against Los Angeles County Probation Department employees, 30 of them to be exact. And these probation officers were not just allowing, but encouraging gladiator-style fighting between juveniles being housed in a treatment facility. 2 specific officers, Taneha Brooks and Sean Smiles, seemed to be orchestrating the fights. And when they told the other officers to keep it quiet, they complied. They also did not intervene while the fights were occurring. Now, video of these fights has been released and it has no sound, but let me give you a good idea of what is happening in the video. Inside the juvenile hall, the camera is capturing what appears to be mealtime. The video begins with 6 troubled youth sitting at cafeteria-style round tables in a common room. The youths are dressed similarly. They have on gray pants, white sweatshirts for most of them. A couple of them have on gray t-shirts and white pants. Very neutral clothing. Now, 3 probation officers are stationed along the walls, the far wall, the left wall, and the right wall. Another officer could be under the camera on the near wall, and we just can't see them in the view of the surveillance footage. The tables are circling the room, which is allowing for an open space in the middle, kind of like a gladiator arena. One young man has been chosen as a designated fighter, and a woman probation officer, presumably Tania, is facilitating the fighting. Like I said, we can't hear what she is saying, but it does seem that she is calling on various teens to fight the chosen teen who stands in the middle. The scuffles are short, but punches are thrown. The female officer does seem to be checking her watch before she finally steps in and breaks up the violence. Like maybe she's timing these bouts of violence. And about every 45 seconds to a minute, a new teen walks through the open door to the room on the left with their food tray. The teen boy will then set down his food tray, enter the middle of the room, and throw a few punches with the chosen teen. Again, I think it's Tania. She will then separate the boys, and the chosen teen remains in the middle, and the other teen grabs their food tray and takes a seat. By the 3rd or 4th fight, a new probation officer enters the center of the room, a very tall man who I would again guess is Sean, the other indicted ringleader. In the video, he now begins encouraging the fighting with the female officer. At one point in the video, the man that I'm presuming is Sean, well, he shakes the hand of one of the fighters, almost like a coach would shake a player's hand after a good play. Now, according to the indictment, Sean told those teens involved in the fights to not seek medical attention. He allegedly wanted the brawls to continue, which means medical can't find out that fighting is occurring. But Sean, trying to cover it all up, didn't stop someone from leaking the video footage to the California Department of Justice, who then launched an investigation last summer. In the video that I described, the chosen teen allegedly suffered a broken nose and a traumatic brain injury after facing off with at least 6 other boys. We only have this one video, and we don't know when it starts and stops, so there could have been more. Now, California Attorney General Rob Bonta said during a press conference that the coordinated brawls were nothing better than gladiator fights. He also said that the probation officers look more like referees or audience members at a prize fight instead of looking like adults charged with care and supervision of young people. AG Bonta said the investigation included reviewing hours of video where they discovered 69 fights that included 143 youths who were between the ages of 12 and 18. I think that bit of data is important here. These weren't 2 or 3 kids settling beef and the officers just letting them get it out of their systems. This was tournament-style fighting. And to add insult to injury here, the Los Padrinos facility, where these gladiator fights took place, well, the fights all happened in the first 6 months of the facility opening. It wasn't a culture that grew and existed in a rundown teen jail. It's a clean, new facility, and it seems the culture was started on day 1. Now, the indictment does detail how investigators believed Tania encouraged the fighting. Allegedly, she would tell the other boys that the chosen boy was a racist, or she might say something like he belonged to a certain gang on the outside, which then would inflame some of the other teens. In a written report to the investigative team, Tania did allegedly admit that she would stop the fights after a certain time limit, Remember how I talked about the watch? But she also said in that report that all of the fighting was by mutual participants, basically saying the kids wanted to do it. Need I remind everyone, the officers are in a position of authority here. I think it is safe to presume some of those fighting were by situation coerced into the action. The person in charge is allowing and timing the fights. All 30 officers. Of course the kids are going to feel like they're supposed to partake in this. The person in charge is making it happen. For me, that's coercion. Now, all 30 officers have been placed on leave. Some of the officers and some retired officers testified on Monday. They were arguing that the gladiator fights were a result of understaffing and the requirements of an impossible job. So, you know the phrase, the buck stops here? Well, the man in charge of Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall, his attorney says that phrase doesn't really count here. He claims his client, Ramses Patron, and I hope I'm saying that right, that his client had zero knowledge of the gladiator fights and that his dismissal from the agency was just a political hit. And I'm sorry to tell you all, the orchestrated fights at Padrinos Juvenile Hall, well, it doesn't seem to be the only issues at that facility or in this system. After the fights were discovered, the whole facility was ordered to close. That happened late last year because it continued to fail inspections, like health inspections. It's a brand new facility and they're not keeping it clean. That hall was deemed unsuitable for youths. But here's the problem. Padrinos was housing a majority of teens who are in trouble with the law. 2 other facilities in LA County had already been closed due to staffing issues. So the probations department denied the order by the California Board of State, and they then left the facility open and operating. All right, because of the chaos, these troubled youths have maintained legal counsel, and they're now demanding that the youths be let out of the facility. And you guys, I actually get this. The state created the problem. You can't be angry at a lawyer using this created problem as a way to get their client out of juvie. Now, the judge is taking all of this under advisement and will rule on those cases in a few weeks. I'm often caught asking who the adults are in the room and when are they going to start acting like adults. There were at least 5 adults in this room on that video. And I'll leave it at that and let you tell me what you think about this case. And let's finish today in Washington State, where a motorcyclist was allegedly killed by a drunk driver. A story that happens far too often. But the nightmare here has an added layer. The alleged drunk driver was an off-duty officer for the Washington State Patrol. 35-year-old Sarah Clausen was traveling on State Route 240 near Richland, this all on Saturday night. Richland is about 200 miles southeast of Seattle. Sarah had been out driving her SUV to pick up some pizza for the evening. At 7:30 p.m., she attempted a left turn while traveling west down the state highway. She failed to yield to a 20-year-old named Jose Sanchez, who was traveling east on the state highway on his motorcycle. Sarah smashed into Sanchez. State police responded to the scene at 7:39, where they found life-saving measures being attempted on Sanchez. The WSP approached Sarah, but soon learned she was an off-duty WSP trooper, and the case was instantly transferred to the Richland Police Department, this to avoid a conflict of interest. Now, Richland police determined that Sarah was exhibiting slurred speech, disorganized statements, and she had the telltale sign of glassy eyes. Sarah declined a field sobriety and breathalyzer test, allegedly telling officers that she, as a 14-year veteran of the WSP, quote, knew how all of this works. An affidavit of the event said that Sanchez's motorcycle was almost completely under the front of Sarah's SUV. The document also states that Sarah had, quote, the odor of intoxicants coming from her person. Now, the affidavit also clarified the disorganized statements that Sarah was offering to authorities. She allegedly said she had picked up pizza at Domino's and was returning home when she approached the intersection. She said she saw a single headlight and thought it was a car with a burned out front headlight and one that was actually illuminated. She said when she hit the motorcyclist, he was, quote, definitely going faster than the posted speed limit. Now, Sarah's attorney spoke with the Herald, a local publication, and he verified his client was familiar with that intersection. He also said Sanchez was speeding. He said his client was the person who began CPR and that Richland police left that detail out of their affidavit. He then stated that if Sanchez had not been speeding, Sarah would have successfully navigated the left-hand turn. Now, when Sarah was booked into jail on a 72-hour hold, a blood sample was taken. Judge Diana Ruff has requested a portable breathalyzer and an ignition interlock be placed on her car to keep the community safe, presumably preventing her from drunk driving again. Now, the results of that blood sample, well, they've yet to be reported pending completion. Sarah has been placed on administrative leave. She will be back in court on March 12th. Just over a year ago, Sarah, in her current role as a public information officer, was interviewed by NBC Right Now, where she urged the public to be more attentive while driving. In that interview, she said, quote, speed, following too closely, distracted driving, and of course being impaired are the factors that lead to more accidents. She then went on to say the following. I know it's easy to get distracted by cell phones, radios, or occupants in your vehicle, but I think just being able to be alert and having that be the most important thing you're doing is driving and keeping you and the people around you safe. Now, as a side note, more than 5,000 motorcyclists die each year in road accidents. I'll keep you updated on this incident. Now to comments from Monday's episode. Well, Rebecca, she disagreed with me about the humor. Can you guys hear Q shaking her ears out? Let me start that again. Rebecca disagreed with me about the humor behind the 18-year-old scorned girlfriend who spray painted the wrong car. She didn't think it was funny that the deputy was making the comments he was making. She instead hoped he would have helped the girls to learn something from their behavior. I totally get that take. I think these officers respond with potentially sarcasm or humor to nonviolent crimes like these because they also have to see the violent crimes, the murders, the domestic violence, the child abuse. So I am going to cut him a little bit of slack. But also, maybe if he would have taken a mentor role, the females would enter into relationships a little bit differently. And then Anna on YouTube wants to know what I think about Casey Anthony. Okay, I'm going to be brutally honest here. I have not gone to her TikTok for a very specific reason. I don't want her to get another view from me. I think she did it. I think she killed her kid. And I think the jury got it wrong. And I say that without anger to the jurors. I just think a woman who is and was a horrible mother has enjoyed freedom while her child lay rotting in a swampy Florida suburb. Okay, with that being said, Peyton Moreland from Murder with My Husband and Into the Dark, she's also my daughter for those who may not know. Well, she and I discussed this just 2 days ago. She gave her opinion about Casey on her Instagram stories, which are probably expired by now, so don't go searching for that exact story, but you could go to her other stuff because she's pretty hilarious. But when we were talking, she referenced how she would never take advice from someone she doesn't respect. And she has no respect for Casey. We both feel like she may be using the life difficulties of others to somehow rehab her image. I guess we just don't give her a lot of cred in this TikTok account. And kind of, you guys, I think it's gross. So we'll just have to watch to see how her social media presence evolves. Maybe it's going to be good. Who knows? And Peyton and I also had a super long conversation about the Ruby Franke documentary. So maybe we can discuss that in the next episode or somewhere down the road because we both have feelings about that case. And if you haven't seen the Ruby Franke documentary, the one with Devil in the title, I think it's called Devil Within, it is really good. But be prepared to kind of be disgusted. Now, Cass on YouTube, she answered a question that I posed about the 2 football players who were partying with adults and then they died on the ATV. She said she grew up in a super small town and she only had 46 in her graduating class. So she understands that a range of ages could be partying together. I totally understand a 22-year-old drinking with a 17-year-old. I get that, especially in a small town. But these were adults older than 30 drinking with 17-year-olds. That I can't get on board with. And then a side note about the 2 football players, the ones we're talking about that died on the ATV, and the arrests that came in that case. I follow a NOAA Press Grove forum, and the admins there are hoping that the arrest of these 3 adults will encourage the investigators that are working on the NOAA Press Grove case to do something similar. Maybe if those people are arrested for providing alcohol to a minor, then they might encourage those people to somehow engage in truth-telling. I'll keep watching Noah's case and let you know. And finally, for those who gave some love to me and my family, and for Casey calling my puppy Q a vibe, I just love you guys. Thanks for being here. I am catching up on case suggestions. Just keep them coming. I love to cover stories that we aren't finding anywhere else. I had not heard about the Ziz Cult at all, and that was a recommendation. And I love to cover stuff and do deep dives on things that haven't been, brought to light. That's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Please share this episode with a friend. Just do a quick little forward of the episode to somebody. I would love to grow the audience here. And we always love 5-star reviews and positive comments. You can like and follow us on all of our social media accounts and our YouTube accounts here at Oh No Media. Of course, like I referenced, there's Peyton's podcast, Into the Dark, Peyton and Garrett's podcast, Murder with My Husband, and my podcast, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.